Okay, Speed City fans, I'm delighted to welcome to the show the president of Trans Am here in North America, the oldest road racing championship in North America, John Clagett. John, welcome to Speed City first and foremost. I can only think, because I'm part of it, that you must be the most frustrated, you and your team and your community, because you actually got to go racing in February at Sebring, got the season started, great couple of races, live stream, new app, new era, and then it all shuts down.
You know, it just seems like that could have been 5 years ago now. With everything that's happened between then and now, it's a distant memory.
Yeah.
Which, you're right. I mean, we had such a positive start to our championship. From the rollout of live streaming, and I think that was knocked out of the park with the quality and the ability to look at all the various cameras around the racetrack as a consumer. And here we are today. We had the ultimate deal where we showed up for our West Coast season opener. My whole staff was there, and the lockdown in California commenced the day we showed up. So we were told to go home. So I had 15 staff setting up our scales, ready to go racing, and somebody walked into the garages and said, "Is it true?" And we're like, "What?" "No, the racetrack is closing. We're not going to be able to race." And that was like the first of the gotchas that have been coming fast and furious.
So I suppose, like all the race series organizers, you've been scrambling to work out in a situation which is impossible to work out, what to do with your schedule. You had a schedule set, and again going to 10 iconic circuits around America, and it's very, very much up in the air. So where are you as we stand here at the beginning of May? Now deep into this, have you got a potential schedule, or do you know when you want to go racing or hope to go racing?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I would say scheduling is the most difficult thing that you do as a manager of a series. And it's a three-dimensional chess game to begin with, because you're trying to get the best venues and find the right partners, because ultimately you're using a NASCAR schedule, an IndyCar schedule, your own schedule, SVRA schedule, HSR schedule, putting them all together and coming up for a championship schedule. So to have all of that basically thrown out and have to start over, and not only once, but several variations thereof, it's a massive undertaking. But the good news is, we're done. I mean, we plan to go racing mid-June and go all the way to the first weekend in December and have a new season finale at Laguna Seca. And we have everything on what was our schedule existing on our new schedule, with the exception of the Detroit Grand Prix. Everything else has been salvaged. So we've taken what was a 9-month calendar, compressed it to 6 months. And, I think our competitors were like, wow, this is great that they've been able to put it together like they've done it. The West Coast schedule might even actually be an improvement for the West Coast racers, because it's now a very compressed schedule. Instead of it being spread out over 9 months, their version of their championship is spread out over a couple of months, two or 3 months. So we got it all ready to go, and I think we're very optimistic that what we thought was going to be our opener, being Indianapolis, will in fact be our opener in mid-June. And Tony Perella, who's SVRA, has been on the phone with the Speedway this week, and I would say the only caveat to Indianapolis is that it might be a spectator-free event to get us up and running. That seemed to be where the Speedway wanted to go with our first race. And what we don't know is Mid-Ohio, in the state of Ohio, that's only 1 week later in our schedule, and whether that's going to have to be spectator free or whether that one will be a full on board event. So it's coming, and that's one thing. And then so I think the curious thing will be how many of my competitors are going to be there. I feel that by mid-June, the pandemic is not going to be the issue. You know, we're going to put in place all kinds of social distancing measures, including even a Zoom drivers meeting. So we can keep our competitors safe. Our registration process is going to be made extremely easy. So that's not a question to me. It's going to be, did the stock market tanking cause any of my competitors to lose their play money, if you will, to go racing, and whether, you know, all of the concerns as being just living in America right now, they want to take a conservative approach to their hobby for the year. It's reasonable to think that there's going to be people that might not participate, but I haven't seen them yet. I mean, I would say that, you know, my indicator is that we had accepted a lot of entry fee income for Road Atlanta, which was going to be our second race. And if they weren't going to go racing with us, you would presume that they would be wanting their money back. And very, very few have asked for their money to be returned. And so to me, that is an indicator that they're going racing, and we'll just roll over that entry fee to what is intending to be their first race. So
in your conversations with Doug Bowles and Tony, and obviously from Doug's point of view, who runs Indianapolis, he's looking towards August and the Indy 500, which he very much obviously wants to have happen. That's his jewel in the crown. But I mean, you talk about the social distancing. What innovations or what kind of things can you help both the marshals, the organizers, the flag guys, you know, the people that put the event on? In a weird way, the drivers are probably the safest of the lot. They're in a tin box with a helmet on. What else what measures, if you like, have you discussed?
Well, one of the things is like the registration process. That's where you get a bunch of people in a small space, all lined up waiting to go into the queue to get an armband to go into the event. Well, in some ways, that's a redundant thing to begin with, because we have a waiver process. We have people on annual credentials, and if the racetrack accepted that we were doing our job, then there wouldn't be any point to even have to go to registration. Indy is one of the most challenging of all American venues because they have their own process, their own waiver. It is different than some waivers, but we're talking about the fact that their insurance company and our insurance company is the same company. So if you make the insurance company happy with a procedure, then the venue ought to be happy and we ought to be happy. And so we're in that process now of, well, what can we do? Can we scan a waiver and have it signed with a DocuSign that's a verifiable thing that everybody, you know, knows is a buttoned up process? And it's all about, you know, a driver that potentially gets hurt at a racetrack and then wants to sue everybody. That's what everybody's worried about when you come down to credentials and waivers, you know, that they have assign the right, they understand their rights, they understand the track's rights, and it's not going to come back to bite them. The reality is if somebody gets hurt that bad, they're suing anybody anyway. Doesn't matter about waivers. So it's kind of a weird thing like that. But so
and
we're talking
presumably
about
COVID is the same kind of thing, which is if they come and they sign their indemnity, I mean, you're not responsible if somebody were to catch.
yeah, and it's just being, like just being responsible. And I think corner stations are a little tricky. There's usually 2 or 3 people in any given corner station, but it's also, I think, pretty easy to think that you could get them 6 feet separated from one another. So we're going to come up with an event procedure and protocol that we're going to really expect all of our competitors to follow. And sure, that same thing will carry over to the SCCA workers and Indy marshals and all of the great volunteers that they have. We'll figure it out.
What's your feeling generally? I mean, you're right at the heart of American motorsport and have been for some time. There's going to be a paradigm shift to, like you say, the stock market, the workforce in America generally. But of course, American sport, which is the lifeblood of the entertainment industry in many ways, and motor racing's no exception. I mean, what's your take on how long it's going to take before we will have 300,000 people at the Indy 500 and, COTA back open with Formula One and MotoGP and all of these things? I mean, have you spoken across the industry, or are you just in your own lane at the moment?
I'm kind of in my own lane on that. The closest thing that I would have had to that is the Detroit Grand Prix, where it's a 90 to 150,000 people, and they obviously canceled. So I haven't been in any industry panels talking about this. I talked to one of my good friends who's on the IndyCar circuit today, and his mindset is, we got to get back to racing or we're going to go broke.
Yeah.
You got to have racing in order to generate the revenue, in order to have the sport. Our situation is a little bit different because we're not so much dependent on a consumer showing up. Yeah, I mean, it's nice, but it's not necessarily a huge part of our budget. It's actually very little of my budget because SBRA is my quote track promoter, so I don't really have to worry about whether there are fans or not, which is a really easy position to have.
Very true. I mean, one little bit of a couple of rays of light that have come out of this. You have launched an E-Series, like everybody seemingly is going e-racing, but companies like Indy and Formula One have been doing it for quite some time. So, but Trans Am hasn't as such. But in a very short space of time, we're already heading fast along to our second event. We did Laguna last weekend. You got to be pleased at how quickly that's all come together. And tell me a little bit about the idea behind that.
Well, we had some preliminary conversations back at Sebring before we knew there was a pandemic coming our way. And we had put together with our eventual partner here, Torque, a concept paper of going to market for a sim game. Torque had fast-tracked that as soon as they saw an opportunity that really needed to be taken advantage of. And I say that Torque is a worldwide provider of sim racing games, but they really wanted to build a custom game that was authentic, and they have put their arms around the Trans Am and said, we want to do it with you because you have enough of momentum going as a brand that we think, getting behind you is a smart play. And we also cross enough different race groups that, in a given year, we're with NASCAR, we're with IndyCar, we're with HSR, we're with SVRA most of the time. We cross-pollinate with F3, F4. So whatever we're doing in our marketing and our platforms will be seen by almost every racing group that there is in the United States. And it reminds me of the days when AMB transponders, who were coming to North America. They picked the Trans Am series to launch. And within 2 or 3 years, they became the US standard for timing and scoring transponders. This seems the same to me, where we've been picked to be the launch point for the sim game, a new partner on our Trans Am app, which I think is an app that's going to be the best there is with the capabilities that it has. We are so different of a company than we were 2 years ago with all of these new fan engagement, consumer friendly packages.
It's really interesting. I mean, I like the idea that I'm still learning sim racing, but you watch Formula One and Indy, and it's very similar to the real thing. And you can see from the guys taking part, the actual drivers, it's a part of their world anyway. And I hadn't realized how much of our drivers in Trans Am actually use sims in their coaching. Our champion Mark Miller, I spoke to him recently, is involved in that sort of thing, but so are several others. But I'm excited. We've already started with liveries, so we've already started the process of making it look like our series. And I suppose that the drivers can give the game feedback as we go along so that they can develop a car that is similar to what TA2 actually is and feels like it when you drive it.
Well, that is the plan. And obviously, there wasn't enough time to build a TA2 car for the game because that takes all kinds of the data and the engineering and the science to actually build it from the ground up so that it's authentic. And that was what we had talked with them about as of Sebring. So knowing that they wanted to fast track it, we did have to take something that was already available and put our drivers in those cars to the start point here. But as we come through this championship, I think next year when we're doing something, it will be in TA2 machinery that is 100% authentic to our brand. And like I said, that'll be very cool.
And like I said, you've got the liveries already, so the individual drivers and companies are getting, are able to satisfy their current sponsors that obviously aren't racing in real life. But can you see a day where the game, and you've already got obviously people like Pirelli around the circuit that we will see at Laguna and at Road Atlanta and many others. But can you see a time where you could actually sell sponsorship of the game to maybe new sponsors that aren't actually sponsors in your real series?
Yeah, no question about it. And I think there's so many things that could happen with this game. It can be, as we figure out how to bring competitors in from Australia or New Zealand or the other places that are licensing the TA2 name, or gamers from Europe. There's 3 or 4 of them that are beating down the door at Torque saying, let us in, we want to race the Trans Am guys. And so the future probably has a lot of upside where we could be racing a World Cup of Trans Am, we could be going to Nürburgring, we could be going to some European tracks, and cross-blending our racers to worldwide racer group as well as a fan base. And as the TA2 game becomes available to consumers, we're probably going to have our drivers racing fans at some point with some sort of, fan activation. So I'm really excited about what it can do for our brand over the, foreseeable future.
You mentioned the growth of the brand of Trans Am, and as I mentioned at the top, it's the oldest road racing series in America and continuous one too. So you've got a lot of history to play with, and obviously everybody's aware of what Trans Am means generally. But it does seem, and I noticed this, I do a series in New Zealand every year, and I also do Asian GT racing, and I was surprised when I was watching a live feed last year to Buriram in Thailand and saw this huge field of TA2 cars ready to go out in Thailand. So I started doing a little investigation, found out a little bit more that a lot of them were Australians who raced in Australia in TA2. And now it seems New Zealand's also got a license. There seems to be a real interest down under and in Asia for this kind of racing. What's your knowledge of that, and how can you see it progressing?
Well, we've partnered up with ARG, which is a major motorsports marketing promotions company in Australia, who also races with the New Zealand Touring Car Championship in New Zealand. So we license them to carry our brand to Australia and New Zealand. And they are putting together a championship. The Adelaide race that was in Australia about a month or so ago before they went into a pandemic shutdown was that first event out of the book for ARG. And there's, another group over there that kind of hopefully will learn to work with ARG and build the brand, because there are 30 to 40 cars over there. And the ARG opportunity is tied to Motorsports Australia, the national sanctioning body, and the opportunity to go to top tier venues. That's what ARG represents for the TA2 brand over and down under, if you will.
And could it also, as it grows, be helpful to the American market of TA2? Because obviously the guys that prepare the engines, prefix, how, the guys that do the brakes, the guys that do the chassis. I mean, can you see your community effectively off-selling or providing parts or potentially even drivers for those series?
Yeah, the Australian version that ARG is, at a national level, it is tied to the TA2 rulebook. Now, I have to put a big asterisk to that because there is a lot of pre-existing equipment in Australia, and there'll be a transition to our spec, and it's going to take 2-3 years to get there. But that is the whole concept, is that the TA2 spec that we control would become a world spec, and then the day is, out there where you could have a World Cup kind of scenario where the best 6 guys from Australia and New Zealand and US and wherever else the series has grown can get together and have a world championship venue, and then rotate that through different territories to do that. That is the vision. ARG shares in that vision. And since they have the New Zealand territory as well, that is at least 3 countries that are, working in together to make that reality.
Well, as you're well aware, Holden now pulling out of Super V8s in Australia. And so that sort of dynasty that's gone on for many years is kind of fading. Could you see a class like TA2 not taking over, but becoming, because their love of V8s and muscle cars is something that is steeped in their history anyway? Could this sort of new adventure prerogative kind of not replace it, but attract the same guys that would have done V8s, or will they sit together?
Well, I think there's always even in the United States, technical specs will attract certain people, and it may attract people that did the V8, but they may come up with something that captures their attention and keeps the majority of them doing something else, or they may not. Who knows? I think the same thing could play out in Germany now with the DTM, and Audi announcing yesterday that they're done at the end of this year. They have over half of the cars, and that's when you talk about those, Aussie V8 and the DTM, the budgets to do those are astronomical compared to TA2. You could probably field 8 cars for the cost of 1. So that may translate to a guy who says, hey, I can go do it for 1/8 the money, or I can bring myself and 7 of my best friends and go do that. But it may not carry over as much as you'd think it could, but it might. Who knows? I think it's we don't make decisions based on who we think we can take from. We make decisions based on what we think is a smart technical package and get the right people to build the brand worldwide. And that in itself should be sufficient to building a customer base.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned DTM, and they made quite a bold move last year by going and teaming up with Super GT, I think successfully. Super GT from Japan, and their best took on DTM's best, and there was a little bit of swapsies here and there, and they had a couple of races, but it seems to have worked, certainly for the fans. And I mean, that to me, a step like that where you have a one-off race maybe once a year could be something as a starting point for, like you say, that world championship or world event for TA2.
Yeah, and we have Australia TA2 on our website now. We've given them a pull down. Some of their videos have made their way to our website. So if you're going to be a Trans Am licensed property, we're going to try to work with you and make your brand bigger. And we are trying to get some Australians into our esports championship currently. It's an opportunity that I think we're at just the starting points of being able to have a cooperative venture.
I know from my work in New Zealand and Australia to a certain extent, but one of the championships I cover is a championship called the Central Muscle Cars, and it's primarily an historic series, but it's got 40 entries or so, mostly 70s and 80s cars, some Australian, some American, but it's a good hodgepodge. And the real interest when I talk to them about muscle cars, they obviously love the cars, they like the price point, but the opportunity to race at your first venue, Indianapolis or Laguna Seca or Road America, I think is really enticing to those guys. So I can also see, I know we had the Australian champion over last year, did a round or two, but I can see them being interested in joining and maybe, going to to Cope and getting a one-off ride and drive if they've got the right qualifications.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a given. And in the 1980s and 90s, old Trans Am equipment was kind of shipped off to the Caribbean, where they created, V8 muscle car series down there. And, meanwhile, the true legendary historic Trans Am cars are still around and putting on great shows on a lot of our weekends, where you got the historic Trans Am and the modern day Trans Am packaged together. There seems to, muscle cars is a worldwide phenomenon. And, it really was created with the Trans Am series as the backdrop. 1966 is when it all began. And that's when the muscle cars, well, you could say 1964 and a half was the first Mustang. But right then and there is when the muscle car I call it a muscle car culture. And the Trans Am has been around. And if you think about it in the perspective of all the series that have come and gone in the last 50 years, one that has survived all of that is the Trans Am series. And so too have muscle cars. That you can't be lost that that's not a coincidence.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, like you say, 54 years, and had 2020 not had this closed down, I think it was going to be an exciting year. And it still could be. I mean, let me do a COVID thing. Let me take your temperature. What, as a team principal, or a series principal, I should say, for Trans Am, your glass half full? Are you confident that that you could stay afloat, that you could keep this going? You've got an E-Series and a start date in June. So right now your temperature is good. You feel confident?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're a small company and lean and mean as it gets. And in today's world, that is absolutely the best place to be. Lean and mean, not having 100 employees that you're worried about or furloughing. I talk to, people all the time about, I think I've heard that NASCAR did another massive layoff recently. And if you were a contractor in the IndyCar world, you were furloughed. You have not been paid for the last 2 months. I'm not in that position. So I couldn't be more ecstatic with where we're. To me, it was all about, can I preserve the schedule? And when we go back to racing, being able to do it in a safe way and getting through the 2020 year and losing only one event, that's awesome in my mind. And it's going to, get us to December, and there won't be hardly any off season to 20, next year. So we'll have to be careful about how much technical rules changes and things that we throw on the competitors come next December. I'm telling my tech guys to lay low and let people use that small little off season to recoup and then come back in 21 with the same basic program. And if we need to roll out technical things, do it in 2022. Yeah. So I'm already thinking through where we're going to be in the end of 2020, the start of 21, and assuming that it's the start of 21, it will be a very normal year again.
Well, John, thanks for your time. Before I leave you, though, I just want one sort of positive note. It's all fun to go e-racing, and it's a bit of a distraction, and it's not what we want to do, which is to go racing. But you must be proud of the way that the Trans Am community has come together for this E-Series, but also how many people who have businesses that allow them to go racing are also committing to the first responders and to this virus, and making equipment, turning their companies almost overnight into helping, the frontline responders.
Yeah, we have, on that front, we have 4 or 5 major, players that are helping the first responders. Kerry Hitt has turned his fabrication company into helping. Doug Peterson's doing the same thing up in Detroit with three-dimensional services. Prefix is doing that. So I'm very proud of them. And when I learn of what they're doing, I'm like, hey, you want a little publicity? We're out there to try to let the world know what you're doing. So they've done a great job with that. As far as the sim game stuff, we have, I think, 40 to 50 guys that have participated from our Lime Rock pilot to Laguna to what's coming up at Road Atlanta so far. And it's been a great opportunity for, I know you as a commentator, me as a series manager, if you will, to get to know these guys on an individual basis. And it's going to pay dividends. That they are grateful to have something to hone their racing skills during this downtime. And the fact that Trans Am was able to put something together for them is a really, really nice gesture. And I couldn't have done it without Torque. So all the credit goes to Torque to putting this together for us. But it's given us the opportunity to invite some of the grandkids and sons of current racers. And I see this as a opportunity that, 10 years from now, we might see some of these kids that are in the sim game right now, putting on their helmet and going racing in the Trans Am's championship. And so I think what we're doing here is going to pay years worth of dividends. And it's definitely well worth all the effort that's been put into it.
I'm looking forward to the end of season virtual party. No expense spared.
No expense spared.
Well, John Clagett, thank you so much for talking to us on Speed City. We'll put this out and continue to follow it, obviously. And we're going to talk to some of the drivers. Already spoken to Mark Miller and a few others already. But I'm excited. I'm really looking forward to Road at Atlanta. And it's actually quite nice to speak to my first sort of series leader and see some positive light, because there's not a lot of positive to talk about at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm really good about where we're at. And I think we've done a responsible job of waiting. And by mid-June, I think everybody's going to be ramped up and ready to go.
John Clagett, thank you for coming on Speed City, and best of luck with Road Atlanta this weekend.